I'll never forget the look in my granddaughter's eyes that night. It wasn't the kind of playful mischief you'd expect from a 10-year-old at her mother's birthday party. Number. Chloe's eyes were wide, shimmering with fear, her little hands gripping my arm with a strength I didn't even know she had. She looked straight at me and whispered, her voice trembling but urgent, "Grandpa, you have to leave here." Now, for a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. We were in the middle of my daughter Emily's birthday party, balloons hanging from the ceiling, the smell of chocolate cake still drifting from the kitchen, and laughter spilling out of the living room. Everything about the house screamed joy, family, and safety, and yet here was Chloe, pale as a sheet, begging me to get out as if the place were on fire. I blinked, searching her face for a clue, thinking maybe she was joking, maybe this was some elaborate game she wanted me to play along with. But her little body was trembling, her lower lip quivering. This wasn't a game. "Why?" I asked, my voice low, trying not to draw attention. Her response was immediate, desperate. "Just go, please. Please, Grandpa, you have to trust me." That word, trust, hit me harder than I expected. Chloe and I shared a bond that no one else in the family quite understood. Ever since my wife passed away, Chloe had been the one who kept me feeling alive, like I still had a purpose. She'd call me after school just to talk about her day, sneak away from the adults at gatherings to sit beside me and tell me secrets. If anyone in this world had earned my trust, it was her. But to leave, in the middle of Emily's birthday, to just walk out without explanation, that didn't make sense. And yet, standing there, staring at Chloe's tear-streaked face, I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. I looked around the room quickly. Emily, my daughter, Chloe's mother, was in the kitchen, fussing over the candles for the cake. Emily had always been the strong one, sharp as a knife, determined to build a life for herself that was bigger than what I could ever give her growing up. She didn't look worried, none of the other guests did either. To them, this was just another happy night in the suburbs. But Chloe saw something I didn't, and that terrified me. My heart started racing as I replayed her words in my head. "Leave here, now. Not in a few minutes, not after cake. Now." I squeezed her hand gently. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" I whispered. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, then back to me. She shook her head hard, refusing to say more, her tiny fingers digging into my sleeve as if she were afraid to let go. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Call it instinct. Call it the bond between a grandparent and a grandchild. But I felt the truth in her panic. She wasn't making this up. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto my face so no one else would notice the fear suddenly tightening in my chest. I bent down, eye level with her, and said softly, "Okay. I trust you." The relief that washed over her face was immediate, but it didn't erase the fear in her eyes. She gave me one final squeeze, then let go, as if passing some invisible burden onto me. I straightened up, the noise of the party buzzing around me like static. Kids running past, music humming in the background, laughter echoing through the house. All of it suddenly felt distant, unreal, as though I were watching a movie instead of living it. No one else noticed the storm brewing inside me. No one else knew that my 10-year-old granddaughter had just told me to leave my own daughter's home. And here's the part that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. I listened to her. I walked out of that house. And because I did, I'm alive to tell this story. If I hadn't trusted her, if I had brushed it off as childish nonsense, I wouldn't be here today. That night, at what should have been a joyful birthday celebration, everything I thought I knew about my family, about safety, about trust, was shattered. And it all began with one whispered plea from the little girl who saved my life. The night had started out beautifully. Honestly, I couldn't remember the last time I saw my daughter so excited to host a gathering. Emily had always been a bit of a perfectionist, and birthdays were her chance to showcase it. She had decorated her suburban home with bright streamers in gold and lavender, her favorite colors since she was a little girl. The dining table was lined with platters of food, trays of appetizers, bowls of chips, and a carefully arranged fruit platter that looked more like art than something you'd eat. I arrived a little early, as I usually did. Old habit, I guess. I liked to settle into the room, see the lay of the land before things got busy. When I walked in, Emily gave me a quick hug, polite but rushed, and then darted back to the kitchen to check on the cake. That was Emily in a nutshell. Focused, determined, always moving a mile a minute. "Dad, don't let Chloe spoil her dinner with too many snacks," she called out as she disappeared through the swinging kitchen door. I chuckled to myself. Some things never change. Chloe, of course, was already at my side, grinning ear to ear. She clung to my arm like she always did, proud to show off her grandpa to whoever would listen. At 10 years old, she had the kind of energy that lit up a room. She was wearing a sparkly purple dress that matched the decorations, her long brown hair tied back with a ribbon. "You made it, Grandpa," she said, tugging me toward the living room where the other kids were playing. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I told her, patting her shoulder. "What's a birthday party without an old man sitting in the corner making sure no one eats all the chips?" She laughed at that, and for a moment I felt lighter. That laugh reminded me of her grandmother, my late wife, Anne. It had been 4 years since Anne passed, but sometimes when Chloe smiled or wrinkled her nose just right, it was like having Anne back in the room for a second. That was one of the reasons I held on so tightly to these family gatherings. They weren't just parties, they were my way of keeping Anne's memory alive. Watching our daughter and granddaughter grow, celebrating milestones together, those moments made the empty nights at my house a little more bearable. Still, there was always a strange tension between Emily and me. She respected me, yes, but she often treated me like I was a relic from another time. Useful for stories and maybe handyman projects, but not someone who truly understood her world. She was sharp, driven, a corporate attorney at a big firm downtown. Her house, her car, her lifestyle, it was all miles beyond what I had growing up. I was proud of her, of course, but I often felt like a guest in her carefully curated life. Daniel, her husband, was playing host as well. He was good-looking in that polished, almost too perfect way. Crisp button-down shirt, hair slicked back just so. He greeted guests with an easy smile, but there was always something about him that rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted around the room, always checking who was watching. Or maybe it was the way he shook my hand, firm but quick, like he wanted the contact to end as soon as possible. The house filled up quickly. Friends, neighbors, Emily's colleagues from work. The living room buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking, the faint sound of music drifting from a speaker in the corner. Kids ran through the hallway, shrieking with joy, while the adults mingled, trading stories about work and vacations. I found my usual spot on the couch, not too far from the action but far enough to watch everything unfold. Chloe climbed up beside me, holding a paper plate piled with chips. "You're not supposed to spoil your dinner," I teased, stealing one off her plate. She gasped dramatically. "Grandpa, Mom said you're supposed to stop me, not join me?" We both laughed, and for a moment everything felt right. But even then, before Chloe whispered those fateful words later, I noticed something strange. Emily kept glancing toward the kitchen, her smile just a little too tight when she rejoined the guests. And Daniel, well, he wasn't mingling as much as he usually did. He seemed distracted, slipping into the hallway, checking his phone, disappearing into the basement for stretches of time. I brushed it off at first. Parties are hectic. People get stressed. Still, a quiet unease tugged at the back of my mind. Looking back now, I realize those were the first cracks in the perfect picture. The streamers, the cake, the laughter, all of it was just decoration over something darker brewing beneath the surface. But in that moment, All I cared about was being there with Chloe. She leaned against me, head on my shoulder, and said softly, "You're my favorite person here, Grandpa." My heart swelled at those words. I kissed the top of her head and replied, "And you're mine, kiddo." Always, I didn't know it then, but that bond, the trust between us, was about to be tested in a way I never imagined. The party had reached that noisy, chaotic peak when everything seems to blur together. Kids running laps through the hallway, adults clustering in little circles with drinks in hand, the smell of melted wax and frosting lingering in the air after the cake had been cut. I remember watching Emily beam as her friends toasted her. She looked polished, proud, exactly the way she wanted the world to see her. I was sitting on the couch, half listening to a conversation between two of Emily's colleagues about their law firm, when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. I turned, expecting Chloe to ask for more cake. Instead, I saw her face, pale and serious, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "Grandpa," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear, "we need to talk." Now I leaned closer, thinking maybe she wanted to escape the crowd, maybe she was overwhelmed by all the noise. But the urgency in her voice immediately told me this was different. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed my hand with both of hers and pulled me up off the couch. For a 10-year-old, she was surprisingly strong in that moment. She led me down the hallway, away from the noise, until we stopped near the back door. She looked up at me, eyes wide and glistening with tears. "Grandpa, you have to leave here. Now." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to tell her she was being silly. But there was nothing silly about her expression. Her lips trembled, her breathing was fast, and her hand squeezed mine so tightly it hurt. I crouched down so we were eye level. "Chloe, what are you talking about? Why would I leave?" Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back to me. She shook her head hard, almost violently. "I can't explain. Please, Grandpa, just go, trust me. You have to trust me." I froze. Every part of me wanted to push her for answers, to demand she tell me what was happening. But the word trust came again, and it rang through my head like a bell. Chloe wasn't the kind of kid who cried wolf. She didn't make up stories to scare people. If she was this terrified, she had a reason. I tried to stay calm, though inside my stomach tightened into knots. "Sweetheart, is somebody hurting you? Did something happen?" She shook her head again, her hair swishing across her cheeks. "Not me. It's not me. But you can't be here. You can't." Her urgency sent a chill up my spine. I looked around the hallway. Nobody else seemed to notice. From the living room came another round of laughter as someone told a joke. From the kitchen I could hear Emily's voice, firm and clipped, as she spoke to someone. Daniel, I thought. Her words too muffled to make out. "Chloe," I said, lowering my voice, "if I leave, what about you? Are you safe?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I'll be fine." "But you won't. Please, just listen to me." I can't describe the mix of emotions that surged through me in that moment. Fear, confusion, anger. I wanted to march into the kitchen and demand to know what was going on. But I also knew that kids have a way of noticing things adults overlook. Chloe had always been sharp, more observant than most grown-ups I knew. And right then, I had to decide. Do I trust my instincts or hers? I studied her face, her trembling lips, the way she squeezed my hand as if her very life depended on it. Finally, I nodded. "All right, I hear you." She let out a shaky breath, her little shoulders relaxing just a bit. But then she gave me one last pleading look and whispered, "Please, don't tell anyone I told you." Promise. That cut me deep. What could be so dangerous that she had to hide it from her own mother? What was happening under this roof that had my granddaughter so scared? I forced a smile, trying to reassure her. "Okay, kiddo. I promise." But as I stood there, my mind raced. Emily was in the kitchen, acting strangely all night. Daniel had been slipping away from the party, checking his phone, vanishing into the basement, and now Chloe begging me to leave. The warmth of the party was gone. All I felt was a creeping dread that wrapped itself around my chest like a vice. Something was terribly wrong, and though I didn't know what yet, I could feel it closing in around me. I looked down at Chloe one last time. "All right, I'll go," I said softly. "But you tell me if you're ever in danger. You hear me?" She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. Then she darted back toward the living room, plastering on a smile so no one would suspect a thing. I stood frozen in the hallway for a moment, the noise of the party pressing in on me, the walls suddenly feeling closer than before. My granddaughter had just begged me to leave my daughter's house, and though I didn't understand it yet, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My life depended on whether or not I listened. When Chloe slipped back into the living room, blending with the other kids as if nothing had happened, I stood frozen in that hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. Her words replayed in my mind like a warning siren. "You have to leave. Now." I stared toward the kitchen where Emily and Daniel were talking in hushed voices. From where I stood, I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, like they were arguing under their breath. Guests laughed loudly in the living room, completely unaware that something was off. I swallowed hard. Leaving wasn't easy. This was my daughter's birthday party. Walking out would draw questions, and what would I even say? "Sorry, folks, my granddaughter thinks I should leave." They'd all look at me like I'd lost my mind. But then I thought about Chloe's face, the terror etched into her wide eyes, the way her small hands had gripped mine. That wasn't the kind of fear a child invented. That was real. I adjusted my jacket, forcing myself to move. My instinct screamed at me to confront Daniel, to demand answers. But Chloe's voice cut through the noise in my head again. "Just go. Please, trust me." And so, against every stubborn bone in my body, I decided to trust her. I walked calmly, deliberately through the living room, waving off a neighbor who tried to hand me a drink. I forced a smile for Emily as she emerged from the kitchen with a tray of fresh glasses. "Heading out early, Dad?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Yeah," I said lightly, hoping my voice didn't betray the nerves coiling in my chest. "Early morning tomorrow. Just thought I'd get ahead of it." She studied me for a second longer than I liked, as if she could sense I wasn't telling the whole truth. But then she shrugged and turned back to her guests. I slipped out the back door, closing it gently behind me. The cool night air hit me like a splash of water. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, breathing deeply, trying to clear my head. The muffled hum of the party drifted out through the windows. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped from one world into another. Inside was warmth and laughter. Outside was silence and darkness. I walked toward my truck parked at the curb, my boots crunching softly on the gravel driveway. But as I reached for the door handle, something stopped me. A gnawing feeling in my gut. Chloe's warning hadn't been casual. She hadn't asked me to leave later or to stay out of the kitchen. She'd said now, and the way her eyes had flicked toward the kitchen, it was like she knew something dangerous was about to happen. I slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, I sat in the dark, staring back at the house. Through the living room window I could see silhouettes moving, hear faint bursts of laughter. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I thought about Emily, about how she'd been darting in and out of the kitchen all night, her smile too tight, her nerves frayed. About Daniel's strange disappearances to the basement, his constant checking of his phone. Something was wrong. I could feel it. And if Chloe hadn't told me to leave, I might have been caught right in the middle of it. For a few minutes, I debated with myself. Should I drive away like Chloe begged me to? Should I march back in and demand answers? Or should I wait, see what unfolded? That last thought clung to me. Waiting. Watching. Maybe I wasn't ready to walk away yet. So, I turned off my truck's interior light, leaned back in the seat, and kept my eyes on the house. My heart pounded as I scanned each window, each shadow moving inside. I felt like an intruder in my own daughter's world, a stranger on the outside looking in. Then I heard it, muffled but sharp. A raised voice, a man's voice, Daniel's. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone was unmistakable, angry, urgent. Moments later, Emily's voice cut through, low and firm, like she was trying to calm him down. My chest tightened. My fists clenched on the steering wheel. What the hell was going on in there? And then, as if the night itself were holding its breath, everything went eerily quiet. The laughter faded, the chatter dulled, even the music seemed to drop off. I leaned forward, straining to catch any sound. That was when I saw the flash of red and blue reflected in the glass, subtle at first, then stronger. My stomach dropped. Police cars. At least 2 of them, maybe more, rolling up silently, lights spinning without sirens. I ducked lower in my seat instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. What in God's name had I just walked away from? If I'd stayed inside, I would have been right there, front and center, when those doors burst open. I thought about Chloe again, her small voice trembling with urgency. She hadn't just saved me from embarrassment or awkwardness. She'd saved me from something much, much worse. But I didn't know what yet. Not fully. And as the police officers approached the house, hands on their holsters, I realized with bone-deep certainty. My world was about to change forever. I'll never forget the sight of those police officers moving up the driveway, shadows cutting through the flashing red and blue. Their steps were deliberate, silent, the kind of silence that carries more weight than any siren. My breath caught in my throat as they surrounded the house. Through the window, I saw the party freeze. Guests stiffened, confused. The music cut out completely. A neighbor's voice drifted from the yard asking, "What's going on?" Then the door burst open. "Police! Everyone stay where you are," one officer shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. The room inside erupted into chaos. Children screamed, adults gasped and backed away, hands instinctively raised. I could see Emily standing frozen by the kitchen, her face drained of all color. Daniel, though. Daniel didn't look shocked. He looked furious. 2 officers grabbed him before he could make a move. He shouted, tried to twist free, his voice carrying out through the night. "You don't know what you're doing. This is a mistake." But the officers didn't falter. One pressed him against the wall, hands locking his wrists behind his back in cuffs. Another officer barked orders to clear the kids from the room. From where I sat in my truck, half hidden by the shadows, I felt the world tilt. My son-in-law, the charming man who shook hands with neighbors, who smiled in family photos, was being arrested in front of everyone. And then I heard the words that sent a chill deeper than anything else. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and making violent threats against a federal witness," the officer declared. The phrases crashed through my mind like thunder. Fraud, conspiracy, threats. I leaned forward in my seat, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. My granddaughter had just saved me from walking straight into the middle of this. Daniel roared in protest, veins bulging in his neck. "This is a setup. Emily, tell them, tell them." I turned my gaze to my daughter. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't even moving. She just stood there, lips pressed tight, tears welling in her eyes. That was when I realized she knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the worst of it, but enough. Enough that she wasn't surprised. The sight broke something inside me. My own daughter, the one I raised, the one I worked myself to the bone to give a better life, had let this man into her world, into our family, knowing he carried shadows with him. The officers pulled Daniel through the doorway, dragging him out into the night. Neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering, some holding their phones up to record. Daniel thrashed against the cuffs, shouting obscenities, swearing he'd get out, swearing they'd regret this. And all I could think was, what if Chloe hadn't warned me? I could see it playing out in my head. I'd have been inside, maybe near the kitchen when the police came through. A 62-year-old man with no idea what was happening, standing too close to a suspect they considered dangerous. What if I'd moved at the wrong time? What if they thought I was involved? My name, my life, my freedom, all of it could have been shattered in seconds. But Chloe knew. Somehow, she knew. Later, I'd piece together the truth. She had overheard an argument earlier that day. Daniel had told Emily, in a voice low but menacing, that if your father finds out, he'll ruin everything. Chloe, hiding nearby, caught those words. She didn't understand the full picture, but she understood enough that I was in danger if I stayed. Back in the present, I watched as the police shoved Daniel into the back of a cruiser, his face twisted with rage. Emily followed them outside, pleading quietly with one of the officers, her hands shaking. I stepped out of my truck then, unable to sit any longer. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, but I forced myself toward the house. The flashing lights painted everything an eerie color, the gold and lavender streamers fluttering in the breeze, the birthday balloons bobbing on the porch rail, all of it surreal under the police glow. Chloe spotted me before anyone else. She ran across the yard and threw her arms around me. "You listened," she whispered against my chest. "I was so scared you wouldn't, Grandpa." I held her tightly, my throat too thick to answer. Emily turned then, her eyes finding mine. For a moment there was nothing but silence between us, father and daughter standing on opposite sides of truth. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then shut it again, tears spilling down her cheeks. And me? I had no words for her, not yet. All I knew was that my granddaughter had saved me, and my daughter had let me walk blind into a storm I never saw coming. As the police cars pulled away, sirens finally wailing in the distance, I knew one thing with crystal clarity. My family would never be the same again. The party was over long before the last cruiser pulled away. What was left behind didn't look like a celebration anymore. It looked like a battlefield. Half-empty glasses sat abandoned on the counters, plates of food untouched, balloons sagging in corners. Guests had scattered quickly, whispering to each other as they slipped out into the night, eager to distance themselves from the spectacle. The house that had been full of laughter an hour earlier was now thick with silence. I sat at the kitchen table, Chloe perched on my lap, her arms wrapped around me like she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. I stroked her hair, whispering softly, "You did the right thing, sweetheart. You saved me." Her little body relaxed just a bit against me, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The weight of what had happened was too much for a 10-year-old to put into words. Across the room, Emily stood by the sink, staring at nothing. Her hands gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles were white. For a long while, she said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and Chloe's uneven breaths against my chest. Finally, Emily turned to face me. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Dad," she whispered, her voice raw. "I didn't want this. I didn't want you to get pulled into it." I held her gaze, my jaw tightening. "You didn't want me to get pulled in?" "Emily, I was already in it the second you let that man into your life. The second you let him into Chloe's life," she flinched as if I'd struck her. But I couldn't stop. The betrayal, the shock, the fear, it all came pouring out. "You knew something was wrong with him," I continued, my voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. "Maybe not all the details, but enough to know he wasn't who he pretended to be. And you still stood there tonight smiling, pretending everything was perfect, while your husband was leading you all straight into danger." Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "I thought I could fix it," she said weakly. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just managed it, it would go away." I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. "Managed it? Emily, you almost let it destroy us. If it weren't for Chloe." At that, Chloe stirred, lifting her head to look at her mother. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air like glass. "Mom, I heard him. He said Grandpa shouldn't know. I knew something bad was going to happen. That's why I told him to leave." Emily's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The sight should have softened me. It was my daughter, broken and ashamed, but I was too raw, too shaken. I kissed the top of Chloe's head and whispered to her, "You were brave tonight. Braver than anyone here. Don't ever forget that." And in my heart I made a silent promise. I would never let her carry this burden alone. Over the next few days, the story spread quickly. Neighbors gossiped, newspapers picked up the arrest, and Emily's world unraveled. Daniel was held without bail, and the evidence piled up against him. Fraudulent accounts, violent threats, shady business deals that went deeper than I ever imagined. For me, though, the hardest part wasn't watching Daniel fall. It was facing my daughter. We spoke in fragments, circling around the wreckage of her choices. There was anger, yes, but also grief. Grief for the life she thought she had. Grief for the trust she'd broken. But through it all, one truth stood unshakable. Chloe. She and I grew even closer after that night. We'd always shared a bond, but now it was forged in fire. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded that she saved me. Not just from being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but from my own blind faith in appearances. Because here's what I learned. Evil doesn't always come with a warning sign. Sometimes it wears a smile, shakes your hand, passes you the salt at dinner. And sometimes the only one who can see through it is the person you least expect, a child watching from the corner, hearing what adults dismiss. I thought I was the one teaching Chloe about life. But that night, she taught me. She taught me to listen, even when the words don't make sense. She taught me that trust isn't about logic, it's about love. And she taught me that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that carries the greatest truth. I looked at Emily weeks later, when the dust had settled a little, and said, "You may have lost your husband, but don't you dare lose your daughter. She's the one who saved us both." Emily cried then, really cried, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who once ran to me for safety. Maybe we could rebuild, maybe, but I knew it would take time. As for me, I hold on to one moment above all others. Standing outside that night, the cool air on my face, the flashing lights painting the world red and blue, and the knowledge that I was alive because a 10-year-old girl had the courage to speak. That's the kind of truth you don't forget. Ever. That night will stay with me forever. I came to my daughter's birthday party expecting cake, laughter, and memories. And I walked away with a truth that changed everything. My granddaughter, just 10 years old, became the reason I'm still standing here to tell you this story. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Never ignore the voice of someone who loves you. Even if it seems small. Even if it doesn't make sense at the time. Trust can save your life. It saved mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own family, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know in the comments what lesson you'd take from this night. And if you want more true stories like this one, with all the twists and lessons life throws at us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. That way, you'll never miss the next story. Until then, take care of yourself. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, sometimes the smallest voice is the one that saves everything.